Cool Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution. And Maduro, the big revolutionary, deploys his warships and drones in defiance of the Imperialist Trump. World War III alert. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Well, revolution is a way of life. And revolution is for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I got some revolutionary dinner for y'all. War in America heats up. Let's get into the content. Salute. I warned y'all from the U.S. That's not going to happen.
Venezuela is going to war footing. Caracas has launched a sweeping military deployment along the Colombian border and the Caribbean coast.
Because they won't pretend like
15,000.
Well, the Venezuelans not feeling bullied. They're deploying their warships, drones, and air force and military. They want war, I guess.
Troops, 60 rapid response units, drones, helicopters, surveillance corridors, river patrols, and warships. Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino Lopez says Operation Catatumbo Lightning will crush the cartels and armed groups operating across 851 kilometers of frontier.
We are carrying out a full deployment with 15,000 troops, helicopters, surveillance, reconnaissance, drones, and warships across our border and territorial waters, and we will prevail.
But Maduro's defiance runs deeper. In just 24 hours, tens of thousands of Venezuelans poured into enlistment centers, overwhelming recruitment points. The Bolivarian militia is being expanded across factories, workplaces, and neighborhoods. Caracas says this is proof of national unity, with over 80% rejecting those who call for U.S. invasion or bombing.
Dozens of thousands of ordinary Venezuelans said, "I am ready." This is national unity in defense of sovereignty and a rejection of those who dream of bombing our country.
Maduro has also torn into Washington's drug narrative. He says Venezuela has no coca plantations and no cocaine production, and only 5% of Colombian cocaine ever crosses its territory. He accuses U.S. mafias and banks of running the real drug business, while Washington hides behind accusations to justify aggression.
Colombia has 7 U.S. military bases, yet cocaine production has tripled around them. The real drug mafias are in the United States, and they know it well.
Turning his fury on Venezuela's opposition, Maduro calls them traitors for inviting foreign intervention. He draws a stark parallel, daring Americans to answer what would happen if U.S. politicians openly called for invasion of their own country.
It is treason. What would happen if U.S. opposition leaders asked foreign powers to bomb Washington? The people would rise to defend their homeland. That is exactly what Venezuelans are doing now.
And Maduro goes further, framing this confrontation as part of a global struggle. He says Venezuela is at the vanguard of a new multipolar world, just as it was 200 years ago in the wars of independence.
We are at a turning point. The American empire is collapsing, and the new world of the South is rising. Venezuela is once again at the forefront.
With U.S. warships, Marines, aircraft, and missiles in the Caribbean, Caracas answers. With troops, militias, and a fiery vow, no one will touch this land. The South China Morning Post has warned that Washington's growing military pressure on Venezuela may drive Latin America closer to Beijing.
China knows all about gunboat diplomacy and Western imperialism. That is why it is sympathetic to countries across the Caribbean and South America now being threatened by a military buildup by the United States.
According to reports, Washington has dispatched 3 destroyers with an amphibious squadron carrying 4,000 Marines to waters off Venezuela. While the stated purpose is to disrupt drug cartels, Caracas, not unreasonably, sees it as a challenge to its sovereignty and security, the editorial noted. China's foreign ministry also criticized the US naval buildup, warning against interference in Venezuela's affairs and stressing respect for international law. Spokesperson Mao Ning urged Washington to change course.
China opposes the use or threat of force in international relations and the interference of external forces in Venezuela's internal affairs under any pretext. We oppose any move that violates the UN Charter and a country's sovereignty and security.
Venezuela, in turn, has announced its own deployment. Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino Lopez said the operation will include drones on multiple missions, checkpoints for surveillance, Navy infantry patrols in rivers such as the Catatumbo, as well as naval patrols in Lake Maracaibo, the Gulf of Venezuela, and larger ships stationed in the country's northern territorial waters. AP reported that about 15,000 armed forces personnel will take part in patrols against the armed terrorist drug trafficking groups operating on the border with Colombia. President Nicolas Maduro added that Venezuela is free of coca leaf crops and free of cocaine production, accusing Washington of ignoring its own drug crisis. The SCMP stressed, with such naked aggression from the US, more Latin American countries may just move closer to Beijing.
What's happening in Venezuela right now feels like a thriller movie, except it is real. Can you picture this? American warships circling Venezuela's coast, waiting for a green light, and inside the country, their president, Nicolas Maduro, is rallying thousands of ordinary people to join his Bolivian militia, a civilian force that is trained to fight if the United States makes a move. The question is, why the sudden drama? Let's drill into that. Washington has long accused Maduro of running Venezuela like a dictatorship, rigging elections and letting drug cartels thrive. In fact, in his earlier term also, he had this idea of military strikes. And now, again, United States is flexing its muscles again with its armada stationed right outside. Now, for Maduro, this is a red line. He went on live television, held up a smartphone that is gifted by none other than Chinese Xi Jinping, and dictated that, look, we have powerful friends too. And here comes the big question. Will China actually back Venezuela if America strikes? Well, Beijing already has billions tied up with Venezuelan oils. It has been supplying technology and loans to keep Maduro afloat. But sending troops or ships to directly challenge the US, well, that's a different ball game. But still, brandishing his China connections, Maduro is sending a clear message: I am not alone. In the meantime, ordinary Venezuelans that are already living with food shortages, blackout, and one of the world's worst economic collapses are being told to pick up guns and join the militia. Some are even doing it out of loyalty, others because they fear being left out if conflicts erupts. Well, the government claims that hundreds are signing up every single day. Think about it. On one side, the world's strongest navy, on the other side, a crumbling nation arming civilians with rifles. Now, if war breaks out, then it won't be just Venezuela that pays the price. Oil market will be shaken. Migration from Latin America could skyrocket, and geopolitics will once again split down the middle. America and its allies versus China, Russia, and whosoever joins to back Maduro. For now, the US ships are waiting, the militia drills, and the world watches a Caribbean standoff that could actually.
Russia is linked with supplying Venezuela with 2,000 attack drones, according to military sources. This comes as the Trump sends us destroyers to the COAS to Venezuela. Russian military blogger Rybar reported yesterday that Moscow plans to deliver Geran-2 drones to Caracas. These are the same weapons Russia uses to strike Ukrainian cities daily. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has not responded to requests for comment about this security threat. The Pentagon remains silent while Venezuela potentially acquires weapons that could reach American targets. Venezuela deployed 4.5 million militia members last week, citing U.S. military exercises. President Maduro's forces now patrol coastlines with drones and naval vessels monitoring American ship movements. But here's what makes this claim suspicious and concerning simultaneously. No major news outlet has confirmed Russia's drone shipment to Venezuela yet. BBC News, Reuters, and The Washington Post haven't reported on these alleged transfers, despite their significance. The Geran-2 drone flies up to 2,000 kilometers, carrying 90 kilograms of explosives. Russia copied this design from Iran's Shahed 136, which devastated Ukrainian infrastructure throughout 2024. Venezuelan Defense Minister Vladimir Pedrino Lopez announced increased drone patrols on August 26th. He specifically mentioned defending against U.S. military activity, but didn't reference Russian-supplied weapons. This timing raises serious questions about American deterrence failures in our own hemisphere. Russia and Venezuela signed their strategic partnership in May, while Washington watched passively. Secretary of State Marco Rubio warned about growing Russian influence in Latin America last month. His concerns appear justified as Moscow tests whether America will defend its regional interests. The drone transfer story originated from Rybar's Telegram channel 48 hours ago. This same source accurately predicted Russian military moves in Ukraine before mainstream media caught up. Preston Stewart, a military analyst, amplified these claims on social media August 24th. He noted that Cuba and Nicaragua might also receive Russian drones if Venezuela's shipment proceeds. These aren't ordinary surveillance drones Venezuela might acquire from commercial suppliers. Geran-2 drones feature GPS jamming resistance, AI targeting systems, and multiple warhead configurations, including thermobaric weapons. Russia upgraded these drones with reconnaissance capabilities after battlefield testing in Ukraine. Each unit costs approximately $50,000, making mass deployment financially feasible for struggling economies. President Trump hasn't addressed this Caribbean security challenge during recent public appearances. The administration's focus remains on trade negotiations rather than military threats 90 miles from Florida. Former intelligence officials expressed concern about verification challenges with this story. Without satellite imagery or shipping manifests, confirming drone transfers remains nearly impossible until deployment occurs. Venezuela's existing drone fleet consists mainly of Chinese commercial models and outdated surveillance platforms. Adding 2,000 attack drones would transform their military capabilities overnight. The lack of official denials from Moscow or Caracas suggests something significant is happening. Governments typically rush to deny false military cooperation stories that could trigger international responses. U.S. Southern Command increased Caribbean naval patrols following Venezuela's militia mobilization last week. American destroyers now monitor shipping lanes where Russian cargo vessels operate regularly. Whether confirmed or not, this story reveals dangerous gaps in hemispheric security. Adversaries openly discuss arming America's neighbors, while Washington debates budget priorities and social policies.
America arming Russia's neighbors. That was a mistake.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into a hot topic. Why can't Donald Trump simply invade Venezuela, even with all the current attention? Recently, the United States sent about 8 vessels and 4,500 troops to the waters near Venezuela, claiming to be fighting drug trafficking. But is this the prelude to an invasion? Spoiler alert, it's not that simple. Let's analyze the geographic, military, and historical reasons that make this idea a logistical and financial nightmare. If you enjoy geopolitical analysis, like and subscribe for more content like this. Part 1. The immense Venezuelan coastline and local military strength. First, let's talk geography. Venezuela has a vast coastline, over 2,800 kilometers long, not hundreds of thousands, as some exaggerate, but still enormous for an amphibious operation. Imagine trying to invade that with just 4,500 troops and a handful of ships. Would it be like handing these soldiers over to the Venezuelan forces on a silver platter? Venezuela is not unarmed. They have a regular armed force of around 350,000 active soldiers, plus the Bolivarian militia, which Maduro claims has millions of members. Sources speak of up to 4 to 5 million recently mobilized militiamen. These men are trained to defend the territory, and with the support of Maduro, who controls the armed forces and has a pack of powers like China and Russia, a quick invasion would turn into chaos. And it doesn't stop there. The South American biome is one of the most challenging in the world. Unlike Europe, with compact territories and few rivers or dense forests, the Middle East, mostly desert and easy to maneuver, or even parts of Asia. Here we're talking about extreme biodiversity, tropical forests, fast-flowing rivers, wild animals like jaguars, and a humid climate that destroys equipment. Venezuelan soldiers, like Brazilian jungle warriors, are native to this environment. They know how to hide, ambush, and survive. The United States learned this the hard way in Vietnam. Part 2. Lessons from history. The ghost of Vietnam. Speaking of Vietnam, the United States knows all too well the cost of war in hostile terrain. During the Cold War, even with a superior army, armored helicopters, tanks, and the most trained soldiers in the world, the Americans lost between 50,000 and 60,000 lives. Why? Dense, humid terrain, full of rivers and forests, just like Venezuela. The Vietnamese used the environment to their advantage, and the United States was forced to withdraw in humiliation after billions in losses. An operation against Venezuela would be similar, costing billions, perhaps trillions, with high human losses. Trump knows this. It's not something that can be done overnight. It requires strategic planning, massive funding, and, crucially, approval from the US Congress, as happened with the United States' entry into World War II. Without these, it's just noise. Part 3. Maduro in power and the intimidation game. Now let's go to CERN. This is all Trump's intimidation of Nicolas Maduro. Maduro won't leave power easily. He has the justice system on his side in terms of institutional control, a loyal armed forces, popular support in parts of the country, and global allies like China and Russia, which invest heavily in Venezuela. Trump accuses Maduro of narco-terrorism and links him to the trained Aragua gang, even invoking old laws to justify his actions. But American intelligence contradicts any idea of a Maduro-orchestrated invasion of the United States. It's more rhetoric for pressure, not a real war plan. To truly invade, the United States would need something along the lines of D-Day in Normandy in 1944. In that operation, the Allies landed about 156,000 troops on the first day, with total estimates of up to 1 million involved throughout the campaign. Thousands of ships, planes, tanks, and special equipment, such as pontoon bridge breakers, were used. It cost a fortune and required phenomenal logistics. With only 4,500 troops now, that's not even close. It would be $1 trillion waste, and the United States has no concrete plans for this. Sources indicate that it's more of a threat to force negotiations or an internal coup, not an all-out war. Furthermore, the only means that could truly give the United States a real advantage would be the massive use of airstrikes with fighter jets, similar to what Israel did against Iran in precision surgical operations. However, the American situation is much more complicated. Unlike Israel, the United States lacks nearby air bases that guarantee the rapid return of its fighter jets after missions. This means that the aircraft would inevitably need to return to the aircraft carriers. And here lies a critical point. Aircraft carriers, which for decades represented the ultimate symbol of US naval power, are now increasingly seen as soft targets in a modern war scenario. We've already seen clear examples of this in Yemen, when the HTS, even without a sophisticated navy, managed to hit high strategic vessels with cruise missiles and explosive drones. Now imagine this heightened risk for an American fleet positioned opposite Venezuela. However, the picture changes if the United States decides to mobilize a large portion of its naval fleet to the Caribbean. A full task force, with destroyers, cruisers, nuclear submarines, and logistical support, would create an environment of overwhelming naval power, making it much more difficult for Venezuela to sustain any resistance on the open sea. But here another dilemma arises. Such a massive deployment would not go unnoticed by the major powers. Russia and China, which maintain strategic relations with Caracas, could consider this type of action a direct threat to their interests, and the possibility of intervention, whether military, diplomatic, or through the supply of advanced weapons, cannot be ruled out. In short, folks, Trump invades Venezuela because the human, financial, and strategic cost would be astronomical. The terrain is hellish.
They not ready.
Maduro is entrenched, and this would require congressional approval, which doesn't exist. It's pure intimidation, and Maduro knows it.
Maduro not in.
That's why he mobilized his forces without panic. What do you think? Is it just a show, or is something bigger coming?
Russia has just opened an ammunition factory in Venezuela. This is a quiet but controversial move, loaded with intent, that further aligns the Kremlin with the Venezuelan government as strategic allies. You see, the plant, located in the city of Maracay, in the state of Aragua, is part of a project signed in 2006 between the two governments that is only now, almost 2 decades later, coming to fruition. Why only partially? Because the agreement also includes the construction of a plant to manufacture AK-10 rifles, which could change not only the arms industry in Latin America, but even the strategic balance in the region. But let's start at the beginning. It all began in May 2005 when the Venezuelan Ministry of Defense signed a contract with the Russian company Rosso-Bonin-Export to buy 100,000 AK-103 rifles to replace the Belgian FNFAL rifles purchased in 1953 and the local copies that had already become obsolete. Venezuela's ambition was clear: to modernize its armed forces, and at that time the AK-103 offered everything needed to accomplish that goal. This is an assault rifle from the Kalashnikov family, belonging to the 100 series. Introduced in 2001 as a new version of the historic AK-74, the 103 combines the reliability of the original design with modern improvements such as rails for optics, lighter materials, and a more powerful caliber, the 7.62 by 39 mm. Continuing on, throughout 2006, 100,000 Russian AK-103 rifles arrived in Venezuela in 3 separate shipments, but the Venezuelan government did not stop there. The agreement signed between Hugo Chavez and Vladimir Putin, then presidents of Venezuela and Russia, also sought to establish an industrial base so that Venezuela could manufacture both AK-103 rifles and their ammunition on its own and under Russian license. In October 2007, Hugo Chavez laid the cornerstone to mark the beginning of construction of the factory. However, the next few years were marked by many obstacles and setbacks. On the one hand, and as you can imagine, the agreement between Venezuela and Russia was not particularly popular with the United States. Soon, for a variety of reasons, international sanctions, especially those imposed by the UN Security Council and the U.S. Treasury Department, blocked key exports of machinery and electronic components essential for the construction of the Venezuelan factory. On the other hand, internal problems in Venezuela were compounded, with construction delays over justified costs and persistent rumors of corruption within the Venezuelan state-owned company CFIM. This company, whose acronym stands for Venezuelan Military Industries Corporation, is the entity responsible for the development, production and maintenance of the country's weapons. According to press reports and sources from the Venezuelan Defense Ministry itself, much of the equipment sent from Russia was stored for years without being installed, deteriorating in a warehouse without the adequate technical conditions for this material. Although the plant was officially inaugurated in 2012, it was not yet operational. During the following decade, the factory never reached a sustained industrial level. Most reports indicate that the facilities operated on a very limited basis without being able to maintain constant production. However, in 2023 the project was reactivated largely thanks to a new injection of Russian funds through the state conglomerate Rostec. This corporation is the Kremlin's industrial arm for the development and export of military and civilian technology and acts as the parent company of Rosso-Bonin-Export, the company specifically in charge of international arms sales. This Russian insistence, especially considering that it is currently in the midst of a war against Ukraine, makes it clear that these plants on Venezuelan territory are no small thing. In recent years, relations between Venezuela and Russia have become even closer. In 2018, Russian military delegations visited Caracas with their Tu-160 bombers. Likewise, Venezuela has participated in almost all editions of the International Army Games organized by the Russian Ministry of Defense, even hosting the 2022 tournament. It is clear that Russia, like Cuba and Nicaragua, sees Venezuela as its main ally in Latin America. In May 2025, both governments signed a 10-year cooperation agreement covering strategic sectors such as energy, mining, transportation, and especially security and defense. This pact contemplated the creation of a binational financial infrastructure that would allow it to avoid Western sanctions and facilitate joint investments in sensitive projects such as the arms industry. This agreement paved the way for the full opening of the ammunition plant, which is now operating at full capacity. This is the first plant of its kind in Latin America and is designed to produce up to 70 million 7.62 mm cartridges per year, which is the standard caliber for Kalashnikov rifles. According to reports, the plant has 4 active production lines, 2 for assembling steel core ammunition and 2 for the production of tracer bullets and blank cartridges. At the same time, the industrial complex is also expected to include other auxiliary structures such as intermediate warehouses for ammunition components, a waste disposal building, and a shooting range for testing tracer cartridges. Rostec CEO Oleg Jeptushenko said, "The commissioning of the plant is an important step in the development of technological cooperation with a key partner in Latin America." Now, what does it mean in practical terms that Venezuela has a Russian ammunition plant? Quote, well, for the Venezuelan military, it means a qualitative leap in terms of operational autonomy. They will no longer depend on imports that are currently limited by international sanctions or on lower quality copies to keep their Russian-made Susaka 103 operational. Now they will have plenty of ammunition to feed them. In a conflict scenario, whether external or internal, the ability to produce your own ammunition and weaponry means you can sustain prolonged operations without relying on external logistics corridors or the goodwill of international suppliers. And this is crucial for Venezuela, which finds itself under numerous international sanctions and trade restrictions by the United States. Some countries in the region have reason to be concerned about this news. First of all, there's Guyana, as the territorial conflict over the country is at a high point. A factory capable of producing tens of millions of rounds of ammunition per year is clearly not helping to calm the waters. However, the opening of the ammunition plants is only the first phase of the Russian-Venezuelan plan. Oleg Jeptushenko himself, CEO of Rostec, confirmed that the second phase involves putting into operation the AK-103 rifle factory, which was also part of the original agreement signed in 2006 between Chavez and Putin. It is planned to launch additional production facilities in the near future, which will ensure a full production cycle of Kalashnikov assault rifles and ammunition for the Venezuelan military, police, and other law enforcement agencies. This means that if it materializes, Venezuela will not only manufacture its own ammunition, but also its own new generation Kalashnikov assault rifles under Russian license. And that's not all. On July 5, 2025, during the celebrations for Venezuela's Independence Day, Nicolas Maduro ordered the Bolivarian armed forces to advance in the development of air defense, anti-aircraft, missile and anti-missile systems with national technology and with foreign support, clearly and indirectly referring to Russia and probably also to China. Nicolas Maduro also assured that any country that messes with Venezuela will suffer a terrible defeat. His words, in conclusion, it is clear that Venezuela and Russia are strengthening a strategic alliance that could cause several changes in the region. Of course, it's not just about weapons and ammunition, but also about military logistics and power projection. That's all for today. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, subscribe, and turn on that notification.
Venezuela's military power. Hello, how are you? How are my esteemed subscribers? In this new video, we are going to get to know part of Venezuela's military arsenal. A country that in past decades was one of the biggest spenders on the purchase of new war material, mainly from Russia and China. This has led to it currently having a respectable military strength in the region. Well, without further ado, let's start with the top. Let's see what you think. In terms of tanks, the Venezuelan army would have 192 main battle tanks, 72 B1 armed with a 125mm cannon, 86 AMX-30VE main battle tanks armed with a 105mm cannon, 31 AMX-13C90 light tanks armed with a 90mm cannon, and 78 C90 Scorpion light tanks equipped with a 90mm cannon. In terms of artillery, the unit is armed with 12 BM-30 Smarch multiple rocket launchers that use 300mm rockets with a range of 90 kilometers. 52 BM-21 multiple rocket launchers that use Russian-made 12mm rockets with a range of up to 30 kilometers. As for self-propelled artillery, the A-48-2S19 MSTA systems are in service, using 152mm caliber ammunition with a maximum range of 36 kilometers. 12 AMX-MKF-3 self-propelled mortars that use 155mm caliber ammunition and 18 self-propelled mortars, 2 S-23 and a 120mm SVK mounted on a Chinese 8x8 BTR-80 armored personnel carrier. towed artillery is serviced by 18 M114A 155mm cannons, 40 towed M56105mm cannons and 40 towed M101A 105mm. In terms of armored transport and combat vehicles, the Venezuelan army would have 123 BMP-3 infantry fighting vehicles, which have a 100mm cannon as their main weapon. The Eco carries another 30mm cannon. 42 Dragon 300 LFV-2 infantry fighting vehicles equipped with a 90mm cannon. They also have 59 Dragon 300 troop transport versions. For troop transport roles, they have 113 BTR-808 troop transports armed with a 30mm cannon, 60 volts 150 commando troop transports and 25 AMX-13VI troop transports. In terms of combat aircraft, the Venezuelan Air Force would have 21 Sukhoi Su-30 Mk-3 bombers, 19 fourth-generation FG-6 Block 15 bombers, 24 advanced training and light attack aircraft, Han K-8 Corum, 3 T-27 Tucano training and light attack aircraft and 8 M35M2 Carib attack helicopters. In terms of air defense, Venezuela would have long-range S-300 anti-1500 anti-aircraft systems with an effective range of 200 kilometers. Medium-range M2E anti-aircraft systems with an effective range of 42 kilometers. Medium-range S-125 Pechora M2 anti-aircraft systems with an effective range of 30 kilometers. Short-range 9K338 and S anti-aircraft systems with an effective range of 6 kilometers. And the short-range RBC-70 Mk1 and Mk2 anti-aircraft systems with an effective range of 6 kilometers. While the anti-aircraft artillery groups are equipped with 23mm CTS-232 twin-barreled anti-aircraft guns. In terms of surface ships, the Venezuelan Navy would be equipped with a Lupo-class missile frigate, 3 Bospor 37 meters Federation-class missile patrol boats equipped with automatic anti-ship missiles, 37 meters Constitution-class gunboats, 3 Avante 2400 Wickery-class ocean patrol boats equipped with C-802A anti-ship missiles and Anchup-2 class missiles also equipped with S-802 anti-ship missiles. In terms of naval aviation, the Venezuelan Navy has 2 Augustab AB-212 ASW anti-submarine helicopters. In terms of armored vehicles for the Marine Corps, the Venezuelan Marine Corps has 40 VN-16 amphibious assault tanks armed with 105mm cannons, 40 VN-18 amphibious infantry fighting vehicles armed with a 30mm cannon, 40 VN-1 amphibious infantry fighting and assault vehicles armed with a 30mm cannon, 11 Awaruga amphibious assault vehicles, AVP-7A 137E11 VE Urutu amphibious personnel carriers armed with a 20mm cannon. Regarding drones, the Venezuelan armed forces would have the Antonio José de Sucre 200 ANSU 200 surveillance and attack drones, Antonio José de Sucre 100 ANSU 100 attack drones and the WA-RPA surveillance and reconnaissance drones.
Russian forces have pushed further into Ukraine's Dnipropetrovsk region, marking the 8th region that they're about to take control over. Colonel McGregor revealed to us yesterday on the show that Russian special forces have now entered in Odessa, and they have been targeting strikes against military installations and infrastructure. If they occupy Odessa, of course, what does that mean? That means Ukraine becomes a landlocked country with no seaports. And that means Ukraine effectively ceases to be a real country. And then this, Reuters revealing that NATO and Western partners are crafting military options ranging from a no-fly zone to air defense systems that they're going to be sending in. Of course, I think you have the head of the British Air Force, you have the head of the British Army in Ukraine today meeting there. Like, once again, like, how many more missile systems? What else can you be throwing into this mess right now? So they have security advisors flying into Ukraine still from the NATO side. So a no-fly zone over Ukraine, yeah, that's going to go well. That would mean NATO is officially at war with Russia, among other things. Meanwhile, right now across Europe, there's growing realization that the continent must shoulder more responsibility in this war. European leaders are saying now that they need to independently defend Ukraine and deter aggression. They can't count on the United States anymore. And then Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, says a peace agreement will likely be on the table by Christmas. Christmas, really? We have to wait that long for peace? 40,000 people? I mean, how many more people are going to die by Christmas time until we can get a peace agreement in place? Former CIA analyst and outspoken NATO critic and friend of the show, Larry Johnson, just penned a new piece on his website, Sonar 21, about how NATO is losing this war badly, but it's much worse than all of that. And Larry Johnson joins us today from Florida. Larry, great to see you. Welcome back to the show.
Hey, good to see you. Good to see Natalie. Usually it's just you and me. So, yeah, I'm glad you brought the better half with you today.
Yeah, clearly. I mean, it always elevates the show when she's around. It lowers it when I'm around. Larry, great to see you. So, you've been doing some incredible writing, and I want to say that I think what you've been doing really highlighting what the mainstream media is totally ignoring this. They're all in, whether it's the BBC, CNN, it doesn't really matter, but most of the European press is fully on board with like rearming NATO, making sure that NATO has enough weapons to be able to funnel into Ukraine. Advisors have been flying into Kiev, meeting with Zelensky on a regular basis. And you made the point in this new piece that NATO is losing badly. Can you talk about some, just on the battlefield specifically, both military and economically here, what we're looking at from NATO's side?
Well, we saw Donald Trump the other day tweet that the fault of Biden was that he forced the Ukrainians to always be on the defensive, except that wasn't true. We go back to September of 2022, when the Ukrainians launched a counteroffensive against Russian positions, and the Russians basically had no military presence to speak of, just some border police, where they were driven out of the northern part of Kherson, which is north of the Donbass. Then in June of 2023, they launched another counteroffensive, and in the process, they lost between an estimated 200,000 soldiers in a failed counterattack that was completely planned and directed by U.S. Military commanders, General Cavoli, among others, sitting in Stuttgart or Wiesbaden. Then in August 2024, Ukraine again launched another offensive into Kursk, and that led to the deaths of 80,000 Ukrainian soldiers. So what we've seen is this repeated pattern where Ukraine is incapable of mounting successful offensives and holding that territory. Russia has pushed back in every single one of those instances. And what's going on right now is what started off in February of 2022 with Russia having about 175,000 soldiers in their offensive into the start of the special military operation. And they were outnumbered about 5 to 1 by the Ukrainian forces. We now, 3.5 years later, have seen those numbers flip. So that Russia has right now about 650,000 trained soldiers, experienced personnel that have had a minimum 3 to 4 months of training all on the front lines, all along the line of contact from the Sumy region in the north down to Odessa in the south. Whereas Ukraine its army is right now estimated to be about 350 to 400,000. The lopsided losses that Western propagandists continue to lie about what Russia's experienced and ignore the true cost for Ukraine. In the most recent exchange of bodies, where Russia turns over the dead Ukrainians that it has captured or taken possession of, and Ukraine does the same with Russian soldiers. Russia received 19 dead Russian soldiers. Russia, in turn, delivered 1,000 Ukrainian dead. So it's a 20-to-1 ratio. For every one Russian soldier that's dying, there are 20 Ukrainian soldiers dying. And what we see taking place, the demographic changes taking place inside Ukraine are horrific. What used to be a country of about 42 million people is now down to about 28 million. And they simply don't have the manpower to sustain these kinds of losses. Excuse me.
Well, just yesterday, Steve Witkoff, the envoy to the Middle East, who is also negotiating this peace deal, said, well, we expect to have some kind of peace deal by the end of the year. And I felt really frustrated by that language because we continue to come here and we're being breadcrumbed. Like, okay, maybe this is it. Maybe that's going to happen. And we keep getting this posturing while you just pointed out people are dying. What do we need to happen between now and the holidays?
Simply listen to the Russians, listen to what they're saying. They're in Roget's thesaurus, they're going to enter a new synonym for the term sycophant. Witkoff. I mean, the kind of sucking up that he does to Donald Trump is just really disgusting. And it's embarrassing. Well, the Russians have been very clear what their conditions are. Now, Vladimir Putin laid it out on June 14th, 2024. It's been repeated ad nauseum by Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister, by Maria Zakharova, the spokeswoman for the foreign ministry, by Dmitry Peskov, the spokesman for Vladimir Putin, the Medvedev, the former president of Russia. And right now, Russia has said, look, the people in Crimea and Zaporizhia, Kherson, Donetsk, and Luhansk voted to join Russia. The people in Crimea did it in 2015 or in 2014. I take that back. And the people in the other 4 oblasts did it in September 2022. They've all voted to become part of the Russian Federation. They are now, through the vote of the legislature in Russia, the Duma, they are now officially part of the Russian Federation. So those states are not going to be returned to Ukraine in any form, fashion. There's no land deal. There's no offer to, we'll give you this for that. None of that's going to happen because it is legally part of Russia. In the same sense that Donald Trump couldn't show up in Alaska and say, hey, Vladimir, I'll give you Alaska in exchange for giving back the Donbass. Not going to happen. That's number one. Number two, that there is absolutely no more NATO activity inside Ukraine, and Ukraine is never going to be part of NATO. Now, these are two demands that Russia will not compromise on. And the West, the notion that the West is going to send peacekeeping forces into Ukraine is a suicide mission. The Russians will kill them. They view that as a threat. Russia's already facing 2 Aegis batteries, one in Romania, one in Poland. The Aegis missile system normally is on a destroyer, but this time they took them off the ships, installed them on land, and the problem with them is that they are capable of firing a Tomahawk cruise missile, which can carry a nuclear warhead. So essentially, Russia is now looking at having nuclear-capable warheads on its border, one in Poland, one in Romania. That's what Russia is trying to get rid of, trying to disarm, push it back. In the same way that we would react very strongly if Russia decided to deploy nuclear missiles to Venezuela, Mexico, or Cuba. We wouldn't tolerate that for a minute either. But, we seem to think we can get away with this. So there's not going to be a negotiated peace deal by December. Ain't going to happen.
Let's be honest, most coffee gives you a quick hit that leaves you feeling jittery, foggy, reaching for another cup before lunch. But what if your coffee actually did something for your health? Rejuvenate Coffee is science-backed coffee, real Arabica beans infused with CA-AKG, which is a compound shown to support cellular energy, metabolism, even healthy aging. It's not a gimmick. It's not trendy. It's built for people who take their health seriously, who want to show up with focus and strength every single day. If you care about how you feel right now and how you'll feel 10 years from now, this is your coffee. Go to 1775 Coffee.
I'll get you out of here on this, Larry, about the tariffs. President Trump, in the cabinet meeting yesterday, said, Zelensky's not been a good guy either. He plays that game. And then he said, willing to put tariffs against Ukraine in order to get them back to the table and make sure that they're involved in this peace process. Would tariffs work against Ukraine? As you pointed out, the population is down to 28 million. They're massively indebted to the IMF. The country is on its last legs as it stands. What would tariffs do?
Nothing. I mean, Donald Trump has it fully in his power. All he has to do is stop sending them money, stop sending them weapons, withdraw the CIA and military advisors that are in country, and also tell Zelensky that he's not going to have a visa to the United States to enjoy his property in Vero Beach. The whole notion that Trump has any leverage with using tariffs or sanctions against Russia, which he's also threatened to do, is just laughable. What we've learned in the course of the last week, and this is why I wrote the article about NATO is losing against BRICS dramatically. All of the major countries in NATO that are the major economies have a debt to GDP ratio of at least 100% or greater. What that means is every day, if you make $100, but you're spending $125, that means you're $25 in the hole. Now do that every day. Well, the next day you're $50 in the hole. Next day you're $75. Next day you're $100. And then it keeps growing. That's the United States. We're 125 to 1 debt to GDP ratio. England is a little over 100 to 100. It's 1 to 1. France is 110. What this means is they're spending more money than they can take in. Whereas there is not a single country in BRICS, none of the BRICS nations have a debt to GDP ratio that's lopsided. Instead, in Russia, it's 19%. So that means, 19%. And
I had no idea that, I mean, every BRICS nation is poor, or every NATO nation is poor.
Yes.
And no BRICS nations are?
No.
That's shocking.
Yeah, it is. And the other aspect to it is when you look at the economic growth, right now, the average economic growth for BRICS, all the BRICS countries combined, 3.6, 3.7%. For NATO, about 1.2%. So, here's NATO making all these big promises about, boy, we're going to spend all this money and we're going to pay for these weapons, and they're broke. The United Kingdom and France are both talking about having to go to the IMF for bailout loans because they are in such desperate economic straits. Not a single BRICS country is in the same position. So, and then just one other sort of interesting tariff note on, four key examples. One, U.S. shipments of propane to China at zero. They've dropped off the table in 2025. It used to be a $4 billion industry. U.S. soybeans, which used to be we were a major supplier to China. China's cut that off. It's now buying from Brazil. Coffee, the coffee that the United States imports from Brazil, it's going to cost us a lot more because Brazil's selling it all to China now. And then yesterday, you heard Donald Trump talking about, we're going to have 600,000 visas for all these Chinese students to come back. Gee, why are they doing that? Because the number of American colleges that depended upon Chinese students who paid full freight coming into the country, they're not coming anymore. And Trump has hit too late. What he was reacting to pressure he's received from all these U.S. collegiate and university colleges and universities. So the whole tariff thing is backfiring on Trump. And then India has just told Trump to go pound sand, that no, we're not going to stop buying Russian oil. We're going to buy more. So the Trump foreign policy on this is just becoming a disaster.
Well, in fact, I looked this up because recently BRICS had a conference and said that BRICS countries are responsible for upwards of 45% of global GDP.
Correct.
But when you compare that to NATO countries, it's 30% or less.
Correct.
So it's clear who the heavy hitters are here, and it's not us. And unless we realize that and start playing nice with others, we're going to continue to circle the drain. Is that the point that you're making?
Absolutely. Trump has embarked on a policy of bullying and threatening, and other countries are reacting to that as you would. You and Clayton wouldn't have friends that are constantly calling you names, threatening your family. Hey, I'm going to break you. I'm going to bankrupt. And then, hey, let's get together for dinner. You go, what?
Right.
You owe me an apology for starters. So, we've threatened India. We've threatened China. We threatened Brazil. We've even threatened Switzerland. I had an interview with a former member. He's a Swiss citizen, but he's a member of the German army. And he was saying, he said, here's Swiss thought we were in pretty good shape with the United States, and Trump's hitting us with tariffs. So it is driving a wedge with other countries that should be our allies, should be our friends. But instead, they're turning to BRICS because BRICS doesn't bully.
Oh, yeah, I've been watching this BRICS disaster unfold for a couple of years now, and it's just getting worse. I would encourage everyone to go over to Sonar 21 and read Larry's great piece on NATO and the collapse of NATO and this rise of BRICS right now. Everyone should be paying attention to this. I really sincerely hope people pay attention to it. Larry, great to see you as
European side and the Ukraine side itself, there's starting to be some really big problems that are emerging, even aside whether anybody wants to give in on some of the issues that they're being pressed on. And to try and make sense of some of that, especially look at the military aspects of this, we have back the ever-popular Colonel Douglas Macgregor, defense and foreign policy analyst, former advisor to the Secretary of Defense, and a highly decorated combat veteran. Doug, as always, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Dan.
Well, listen, we've talked a number of times already about after Alaska and what Trump was really enthusiastic about into this war. We even go back further than that, where he was going to end the war in a day and then 100 days and then a couple of weeks and 50 days, 10 days. And then, none of those deadlines keep happening. Right now, we're kind of in a period where he said, well, I think we'll know something in a couple of weeks. What do you make, first of all, is just Trump's intent and his desire here? Because it certainly is better than what we had with Biden, who wouldn't even talk to Russia. But is his possibilities or is his push realistic?
Well, I agree that President Trump is a vast improvement over his predecessor. But as we both know, that's not really saying very much. That's a pretty low bar. But having said that, I think what we have to understand, and you know that I like President Trump personally, and I think his instincts or intentions are true, is that we're witnessing one long, uninterrupted reality TV show. Whatever President Trump does is designed for optics. In other words, the meeting in Alaska had very little substance to it. And I don't think he was terribly concerned about the substance. He simply wanted to be seen as changing the climate, at least in broad terms, with Russia. He wanted to be photographed with President Putin surrounded by his F-22s or whatever the aircraft were that were present at the time. And of course, you had the B-2 bomber that overflew everything. This is all vintage Trump. He's very theatrical. He knows how to stage things. But the problem is that meetings on the spur of the moment, which is really what this was, mean there's no systematic preparation that usually takes months. Americans were used in the 1970s and 80s to summits between the Soviet Union and the United States, for instance, after many, many months of very hard work and preparation, detailed preparation for the meeting, such that the leaders who were present, Gorbachev and Reagan, for instance, were no longer debating over the substance of anything. They were talking about the impact and why they thought it made sense. And when they spoke publicly, one had the impression that both had thoroughly digested the material and were reliably supporting it. I don't see any of that with President Trump. So I think the Alaska meeting was a feel-good moment and not much more. And so when people say, well, where are we on the peace front and what kinds of agreements are in the offing, I tell them, look, I don't see any. There are no such agreements. Again, there has never been a strategy enunciated by President Trump and the administration. Frankly, whatever's written on paper doesn't matter because President Trump is impulse driven. So at the end of the day, I just think we're where we were months ago. There's no resolution in sight. And you got to be very careful of these claims. I could end this war in 24 hours. You know, how well did that go down? That's a lot of nonsense. But if you know nothing about Ukraine, know nothing about Eastern Europe, nothing about Russia, and you view yourself as a brilliant deal maker, this is sort of another exercise in selling the used car. And I don't think that works. And so while he may have meant well, and I'm perfectly willing to accept that possibility, nothing of substance came out of it.
And I think you could probably just carry that on through right to Washington, D.C. A week ago on Monday when he had Zelensky and then the European leaders all paraded across the Oval Office. And again, I think that they reiterated where they were weeks, if not months before that. I don't see any change in them either. Do you?
No, not yet. We can come back to that. I do want to make a comment, though, about this particular photograph because General Kellogg apparently has endeared himself to the Russians quite a bit. He apparently has been using the same cell phone and cell phone number, though encrypted over and over and over again for months, maybe years. And as a result, the Russians were able to follow all of his activities whenever he visited Chazov Yar, Chernigov, any of these places. And it is being used for targeting. So that many of the targeted locations that I just mentioned that he's visited have been utterly and completely destroyed, along with whatever military personnel were present, including NATO and including U.S. So he's been a real boon to Russian intelligence.
Wow, did not know that.
Well, I don't think most people do. I was, excuse me, I was not aware of it either until somebody in the intelligence community pointed it out to me. So it's tragic, but I'm afraid it's true.
And now let's continue on back because the issue is not just what Trump may or may not say. I think that's actually a very interesting observation you made about a ongoing reality TV show because that certainly matches what we've seen. I hadn't thought of it in those terms, but wow, that's pretty accurate. Unfortunately, it's not just him, or at least there's other actors on here. This is former Secretary of State, former CIA Director Mike Pompeo on Fox News having a banter about the part of the claim that that Trump got Russia to agree that they would take back the Donbass area, that Ukraine would evacuate it and hand that back over. And Pompeo basically just mocks that and laughs at the idea. Says it's just posturing.
Even to suggest for a moment that they would get all of the Donbass, which is a region that they've been fighting to control wholly for a long time, have been failing to do so, and they just want it for free, want it for nothing, before they've given away anything major. Is that something that can be dismissed pretty readily?
Yes, David, I think it could be dismissed quite readily. In fact, think about this. The Russians have lost somewhere between 200 and 250,000 soldiers. That's dead. That's not casualties. Casualties are multiples of that. In a decade plus of fighting, the United States lost 50,000 soldiers. I mean, the staggering death toll is very real. Putin knows that. And so when he makes this claim that someone's going to give him some real estate that has been fought over like this, I think he knows that's not right. In the end, President Zelensky is going to have to likely accept that some of the real estate that the Russians have taken, he's not going to be able to reclaim immediately. He won't be forced to recognize it. I think there's a deal in there that can be reached that is fair and just and provides sustainable another, pick a number, 25 years of peace if we get the security guarantee piece of this right.
So all we have to do is get Russia to agree to give in on almost all of their positions from a position of strength. What do you say to that?
Well, remember, this is the same man who pointed out that when he was the head of the CIA, it was his job to lie. And I think he's done an excellent job of it. He continues to lie about all of this business in Ukraine. He's adopted this utterly fictitious narrative that everything started with Putin's decision some morning to wake up and decide to invade Ukraine. It's all nonsense. I wouldn't pay much attention to anything that Pompeo says. I would just dismiss it out of hand. It's unworthy of serious discussion. And by the way, I think President Trump would probably say that privately as well.
And it's unfortunate, though, because you certainly know that and have good reasons to making that statement. But most people watching television, they don't know that. They think, wow, former CIA director, former Secretary of State, he must carry a lot of weight. He certainly is still friendly in terms with President Trump. But one wonders what the purpose then of having him say stuff like that. And by the way, this was in a certain sense mirrored by Emmanuel Macron about a week or so ago when he was mocking the Russian side, because you saw the anchor there said, well, it's ridiculous to think that Russia, who couldn't take the Donbass in all these 3.5 years, they're just going to be giving it to them. Macron kind of echoed that and says, well, look, in the last, I think it's since November 2022, they said Russia's only captured an additional 1% of territory, so they really aren't that capable. So what do you say to those kind of comments?
Well, we've been down this road before. Putin framed this as a special military operation. He did not frame it as an all-out war. But he discovered after the first several months, certainly after the first 6 months of action, that he was not really facing Ukraine. He was facing the United States and the West, primarily U.S. military power and all of its enormously valuable capabilities from seabed to space. When that was finally discovered and understood, and it wasn't understood at the beginning because I think President Putin, who's always been very favorable in his thinking about the West, had to come to the conclusion that this was a completely malicious action on the part of the United States to destroy Russia. When that happened, everything began to change. I just think that Macron is another globalist. The globalists in London, Paris, and Berlin are all clinging desperately to power right now. Their populations almost universally loathe Macron, Starmer, and Merz. But the oppressive apparatus that they control, the media that they control, the governmental institutions, the intelligence services are working overtime day and night to suppress any possible emergence of a viable opponent. And that's what's happened to the Alternative for Germany. It's happened in France. It's happening in England especially, but also Scotland and Wales to a lesser extent. And the sad part is that it's hopeless because the war is being won by the Russians. Now, this business of territory, President Putin did not set out on this operation to capture territory, never did. We're the ones that keep obsessing over territory. What he set out to do was to utterly and completely annihilate the Ukrainian threat. That Ukrainian threat was manifested by its paramilitary and armed forces. They are just about gone. Let's face it, they've been killed in great numbers. We now have all sorts of information saying anywhere from 1.7 to 1.8 million Ukrainians have been killed on this eastern Ukrainian battlefield. And that's really been the objective, to destroy that entity. The Russians are now operating on the other side of the river. And a lot of people don't realize this, on the outskirts of Odessa. You've got special operations forces there directing strikes and eliminating the Odessa base of operation for the regime. I think you're going to see more of that in the future. But again, if you go back to historical experience and the origins of what we call Ukraine and New Russia that was created under Catherine the Great, it goes back to the capture of Crimea, and then the settlement of the areas along the Black Sea out to the Romanian border and all the way up along the Dnieper River. Those things are real, and Putin has made it very clear that that portion, which is settled by Russians, populated by Russians, where the Russians speak, read, and write their language and their culture is predominant, those will be protected. They will be kept. They will not be given up. But the idea that he was ever interested in marching all the way to the Polish border is a lot of nonsense. Now, if no one is willing to sit down and secure an agreement with Moscow that basically turns what's left of Ukraine into a neutral state on the Austrian state treaty model, then I guess the Russians will actually cross in strength and head west because they don't have any choice. What the Russians don't want to do is refight this war. But again, we've never seen things in that light because we don't want to. We want to cast Putin as the aggressor. He has to be demonized. He's the latest version of Gaddafi or Saddam Hussein, the usual suspects. It's all nonsense. And unfortunately, when you listen to Pompeo and others, they fall back on that phony narrative. And that narrative is picked up particularly by Fox News, but also by the other mainstream media outlets. And let's face it, our generation, my generation, I'm a so-called boomer, we all watch that stuff. Now, I don't. I mean, occasionally I'll put it on just to see what the other side is saying. But unfortunately, the majority of my age, they still go back to the same poison well to ingest more poison. The rest, 40 and under, they've walked away. They're getting their information and news elsewhere.
Yeah, like the Daniel Davis deep dive. That's why we're on the air right here and having you come in and talk about this. You mentioned in there about that Russia doesn't want to fight this war again. Pompeo said toward the end of that clip right there that if we get the security guarantees part right, he said we might have as much as 25 years of peace before a new conflict breaks out. Well, in looking at what those security guarantees look like, President Trump was asked yesterday from the Oval Office, and he says, well, we really don't know about them, but one thing, it's going to be easy.
Well, you don't know what security guarantee is because we haven't even discussed the specifics of it, and we'll see. Number one, Europe is going to give them significant security guarantees, and they should because they're right there. But we'll be involved from the standpoint of backup. We're going to help them. And I think if we get a deal, and I think we will, but if we get a deal, I don't believe you're going to have much of a problem.
So, yeah, we don't even know what this was crazy. We had the Alaska, we had the Oval Office meeting with Europe. And then now yesterday, we're still saying we don't even know what the terms that we're trying to get done are, but it's not going to be hard. I mean, what do you take from that?
Not much. It's more hot air. I mean, if with all the hot air that comes out of the Oval Office these days and Congress, I'm surprised that Washington is still on the planet, hasn't lifted off and been elevated into outer space. I think what we need to do is understand that there are certain people with a keen and justified interest in what happens to Ukraine. If you live in Lithuania, I think the Lithuanians have an interest, although I don't think it's as great as the others. Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, Moldova. Those are the key states that border Ukraine. Now, in the case of Poland and Hungary, and I don't know about Slovakia, they also have some territorial interests given their history. I know that the Hungarians would like to bring in a couple of 100,000 Hungarians that are living inside Ukraine. Got to go all the way back to the Versailles Treaty and then subsequently the tragic outcome of the Second World War, and see that a lot of these people ended up in places they didn't want to be, under governments they didn't want to be subservient to. So they all have an interest in what happens in Ukraine. They're the ones that really need to sit down with the Russians. I would argue the Germans do. The Germans, because they've always played a very, very important role in Central East Europe. They have long-term strategic interests with Russia. They need to sit down. They should be part of that. But as far as the rest of the Europeans are concerned, they don't know anything about the region. They have no background or experience there. They're up to mischief. They're up to malevolent activities. We're back to MI6 moving in to create havoc today in the Balkans, in a place like Croatia, trying to foment conflict with Serbia or put people in power in any of these Balkan states that are, like their contemporaries in Western Europe, enemies of their own population and countries. This sort of thing needs to stop, but unfortunately it's on autopilot right now. And I don't even think President Trump is aware of just how serious the problem is. But the notion that somehow or another what Macron thinks in Paris or Starmer in London is important to the outcome is nonsense. They're just globalists clinging to power, trying to convince everybody that Russia is this great and powerful threat that can't wait to overrun Europe. That's just not true. It's not been true from the very beginning of this, and it's less true now than at any point in the history of Europe. Everybody except the United States and its globalist friends wants peace. They want peace and prosperity. That's what they want. Now, the good news is that President Trump said something that makes a lot of sense, that we are in a backup mode. That's a good thing. And he ought to repeat that, because these people, they need to come to terms with Russia, not us. We have interest in Russia. We want good relations with them. And I think privately, President Trump would say that. The problem is that he cuts off his nose to spite his face on a routine basis by making comments and statements and failing to rein in the CIA and other entities, government entities, and get them on board with a real strategy that is promising in terms of its relevance to peace and prosperity. But I'm glad he said backup. That's where we belong in Europe, not as the first responder, not as the single key player representing everybody else. That's nonsense.
And you know, I'm going to show you something here that kind of illustrates why Europe is so keen on getting us not on the backup, but on the front line, because one of the things that especially Macron and Starmer keep hitting relentlessly is this so-called coalition of the willing. And this coalition of the willing, they've been talking about, they want all these troops to be able to overlook this ceasefire that they want to get, or this end of term negotiations, etc. But as Sean Bell pointed out on Sky News earlier today, that's a bit of a heavier lift than they were thinking.
What form will they take? Ultimately, they have to be credible and they have to have teeth. One of the challenges that Ukraine faces is they've got at least 1,000 miles of frontline border, even more if you include the border with Belarus. And let's give an idea of the scale required for troops on the ground. If you were to put troops 60 feet apart, which doesn't appear that credible as a deterrence, you'd need 100,000 troops to man the border. Now, you've got to give them a break, so they've got to have 4 months on, 4 months off, and then 4 months training ready for deployment. So you actually need 300,000 troops to be able to man that. Where would these come from? Well, the harsh reality is, even if you use the whole of the UK army, about 30,000 deployable, that's about 10%. There's potential for France to provide another 10%, but it's pretty clear Italy wouldn't provide any. Poland is worried about its own national security, and there's no way that America wants to get itself bogged down in Ukraine. And therefore, where would the rest of these troops come from? It's just not a credible option.
I'm sorry, that was actually on the 19th. That wasn't from this morning. I saw the video this morning. But in his numbers are even off because of that. That's if like every troop was actually a combat troop standing on a picket line. But then, of course, you also have all the enablers and everything. So you'd probably be closer to like 600,000 or 700,000. And there's not a fraction of that. So what is going to, I mean, if it comes down to nut cutting time and they actually have to produce, what is Europe going to do?
Not much. And there's another factor to be considered that nobody ever brings up. If you go back to the aftermath of the Vietnam War, and I entered the Army from the Winter Ranger Course. I graduated from West Point in 76, but I went through obviously armored training and then went to the Winter Ranger Course. So I reached my first unit of where I served, a cavalry unit in Germany, in March of 1977. Now, our Army, even at that point, was in very bad shape. And I would argue that by 1975, we had really bottomed out. The Vietnam War destroyed the United States Army. It wasn't just the NVA and the Viet Cong. Many of the policies that we had in place, the way the generals operated and managed the force, destroyed the United States Army. It then took from, I would argue, from 1975 to 1985 to rebuild the old army. We didn't really build a fundamentally new army. We just took the old World War II structure, improved upon it, put new equipment in it. We did change some training policies and personnel policies. But what I'm trying to say is the Europeans cannot expect to have a real ground force of any real capability, properly organized, trained on a strategic level for 10 years. So the notion that some agreement could involve what you just mentioned, and that force would be meaningful in any way, shape, or form is absurd. In the meantime, the force that he described would be sitting across from a Russian force that is very well trained, battle hardened, now very, very well led, I would argue, and has great technology at its disposal and knows how to fight. The whole thing is ludicrous nonsense. So you got to go back to something like the Austrian State Treaty. And that needs to be the model. And that involved no U.S., European, NATO forces under any circumstances inside Austria. You'll remember when we flew back from Saudi Arabia in 1991, we actually had to fly around Austria because the Austrians were neutral. They wouldn't allow us just flying troops back from the Middle East to enter their airspace. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about a truly neutral state. That's what the Russians want, with limitations on what they can do. And as it's been pointed out repeatedly by everyone from Ambassador Friedman to Professor Mearsheimer and a whole host of others, neutrality was the best thing that ever happened to Austria. They now have a higher standard of living than the Germans do, and that was never true in the past.
And look, the part that's just, it's still stunning to me to see. I know you won't be surprised by what follows here, but it does go to show that this is Lord Ricketts, who is a former national security advisor for the United Kingdom, was going on talking about the difficulties that people are talking about here, that what Sean Bell had mentioned and some of these others. But he says not to worry, because as it turns out, Russia's already lost.
If you look at the big picture, they've really lost badly already, because one of the things they did not want was more NATO closer to Russia. Well, they've got Finland and Sweden in NATO now. They would never have joined if it hadn't been for the war. And they've also got new determination by the Europeans to up their spending on defense, to take on more responsibility and to stand with Ukraine. So I think in the big picture, Russia has in an important sense already lost. And Ukraine is now going to be a pro-Western democratic country, for the long term.
A pro-democratic Western country.
You mean one of the biggest organized crime states in the world, heavily engaged in drug trafficking, child trafficking, and every other horrible form of criminality, is now going to be this liberal democratic paradise. I thought it was nice that he was sporting his Ukrainian pin on his lapel. So obviously this is a very objective thinker and analyst. Listen, the whole British ruling class is infected with self-delusion. The whole, you're talking about a country right now that is nearing open rebellion against its government, because the government is dedicated to the destruction of its own people. And he's a part of that. I think the truth is as follows. He's obviously completely delusional, and he's wrong. Russia hasn't lost a damn thing. Russia is in better shape now than it's ever been. And Russia obviously is interested in peace, as any sane person, any sane state anywhere in the world would be interested in peace, and is looking for partners in peace. But the partners are reluctant to leave this thing called NATO and strike out on their own, with the exception, obviously, of Prime Minister Orban and I would argue Fico in Slovakia. They're at the vanguard, though, of a very large mob that is beginning to form. NATO is finished. I've said this 1,000 times. It's a terminal patient. In other words, you walk in the room and here's the terminal patient. He's hooked up to all the machinery. He can't speak, move, or do much. And people like Ricketts want to give the patient a haircut and a shave. The truth is, the various others in the room are going to pull the plug on this patient. It's going to go away. NATO doesn't serve the purpose for which it was founded. and it has been wandering in the wilderness looking for a reason to exist ever since the fall of the Soviet Union. They picked the wrong reason to exist, which was war on the Soviet Union, but they're globalists. They need this enemy picture. They need the lie. They need the narrative that's utterly and completely false and fictitious. They need it because if it's given up and people realize, gosh, we've lost badly. NATO has been a total failure. They've thrown everything they have but the kitchen sink at the Russians, and they've been crushed. And we've killed millions of people or destroyed this country of Ukraine. It may never recover to its former position or strength ever. And all of this for what? To supposedly harm, hurt, destroy Russia. It's a huge failure. If Starmer is compelled to admit that, if Macron is compelled to admit it, if Merz is compelled to admit it, they're finished immediately, within minutes. I think they're all going to go away shortly anyhow. But nevertheless, that would be the downfall of the entire globalist project, of which Project Ukraine is a big part. Remember, these are all the same people that invited millions of people from North Africa, the Middle East, and elsewhere to come into the various European states. And it's created chaos and havoc because the people that live in these countries have said, wait a minute, we can't afford them. We don't want them. Why are they here? What's wrong with being German, French, English, Welsh, Scottish, Irish? Everybody's beginning to ask these questions. The Italians have had it, but nobody's been willing to stand up and say, okay, I will take all the abuse for being everything that you say that I am, bigot, racist, all this crap. I don't care anymore. I love my country. I'm going to defend it to the bitter end. And the war that we need to win is not in Eastern Ukraine. It's inside our own countries. That's the issue. That's coming. Today, Nigel Farage is holding some sort of or may have already held it, a public meeting where he was going to display some strategy, which I think is marvelous, on how he's going to deport large numbers of people from England. That's what we need. I mean, you had several thousand Austrian, I don't know how many, tens of thousands, don't know how big it was. They demonstrated in Vienna recently, and they all chanted, no importing, time for deporting. And they want to deport as many of these non-Europeans as they've got in their country. The point is this, there's always a certain number of people from outside any society that can be admitted to the society who are different from the society in small numbers. And that the society can cope with that. What the society doesn't cope well with is a massive invasion of millions. We're not coping well with it. They're not coping well with it. It has to stop, and it has to be reversed. And that's where we're headed. We're all headed there. I just wish we had a real strategy. I cheer when I see President Trump say Washington is a disgrace. Of course it is. I've seen it deteriorate for decades. I was always embarrassed with my European colleagues in NATO whenever I'd come back for conferences in Washington and they came with me. And you see what you had on the streets of Washington, and the criminality was out of control, and it was badly run, badly organized. Dulles Airport was a disaster. He wants to change that. I'm 100% for it. But of course, you and I know that's the tip of the iceberg. We have these 10 or 12 major cities, over 1 million, that are in terrible condition. And what do you get from the critics? Oh, it's wonderful. It's gotten so much better. Oh, we should be celebrating the presence of tens of thousands of human beings strung out on drugs, living on the streets. That's a great thing. Yeah, what's wrong with that? This all has to stop. Same problems in France and Italy and Germany. And this is common to all of us. It will be reversed. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be ugly. And the whole globalist project is going to collapse. Ukraine is going to go away as a problem because we can't solve it. And I think President Trump knows we cannot solve it. This is a matter for decision by the Russians. Always has been, for a very simple reason. Who was willing to fight? The Russians. Were we willing to fight? No. Were any of the European states willing to go in there and fight, with the possible exception of the Poles, who sent thousands of Poles into that Ukrainian army to fight, and at least 2,000 or 3,000 came back dead. The Poles had said, whoops, we made a mistake. That was a dumb idea. So I don't see anybody going over there anymore, period. I think the whole idea of guarantees is something that needs to go back to the Austrian State Treaty. What was guaranteed at that point? There were no forces involved. We and our European allies simply said, yes, we will abide by the provisions in this treaty. We will not try to introduce weapons or equipment or people or anything else into Austria. Austria will govern itself. And we accept the fact that the Russians are going to monitor this for some 20, 25 years to ensure that all the provisions that they have outlined have actually been accepted and implemented. And it worked. There's nothing wrong with that. That's what needs to happen in Ukraine. But if you say we're going to do that, then you're admitting the whole thing is a lie. The entire project from the beginning has been a lie.
And it's interesting you use that phrase. Russians are willing to fight, and clearly we are not. I often think it's comic when you hear so many of this coalition of the willing, and they want these security guarantees as a deterrent to Russia, when we have proven for 3.5 years nobody in Europe is going to fight with their troops. Now, why in the world would they do it later? It defies logic. But the Russians, on the other hand, were very clear on this. And earlier on one of my shows today, we actually had the Deputy UN Ambassador for Russia, Dmitry Polyansky, on. And I asked him, I said, back in, I think it was May, your boss, Nevensia, the UN Ambassador from Russia, said on the UNSC floor that Russia would either accomplish its objectives for the special military operation in negotiations or on the battlefield. And I asked him this morning, has any of that changed?
From the outset, not only my boss, but President Putin, Minister Lavrov were saying that we are ready to continue our fight if the other side is not listening to what we are saying, and if the other side prefers to see the solution on the battlefield. This is not the scenario that we prefer, but we are ready for this scenario, and nothing has changed in this regard.
And so there you have it there. So the question is this just Russia putting on a good face, or do you think they actually mean what they say?
Well, I think Ambassador Polyansky is correct. And I don't think there's any question about their readiness to do what they need to do to secure their country. And that involves doing exactly what Ambassador Polyansky said. We, on the other hand, and we need to keep this in mind, we are now suddenly presenting Maduro in Venezuela as another potential Saddam Hussein who needs to be removed. We see how well that regime change worked in Iraq. The people of Iraq want us out of the country, and Iraq is now closely aligned with Iran, the very state we said we didn't want to have any say in what happened in Iraq. We did everything we could to put them into power in Iraq. So I think now we're dealing with something similar in Venezuela. I hope we don't think in terms of direct intervention, because if we do, we'll ultimately regret it. On the other hand, I fully support the notion that the drug trafficking and criminality that emanates from Venezuela and moves north via sea and up through Central America and over the Mexican border, all of that needs to be dealt with very substantially. But I would not go down there to fix it, because our track record of fixing those kinds of things is not good. But I see a lot of evidence that we're building up for something like that. At the same time, we see a buildup going on right now in the Middle East to prepare Israel for what ostensibly appears to be Israel's resumption of war with Iran. And of course, we've been involved in Azerbaijan and Armenia, and we had a nice, beautiful reality TV program showing Azeris, Aliyev, and Pashinyan, the leader of Armenia, sit together and supposedly sign some great peace accord. That all seems to be falling apart pretty rapidly, and the various mafias that had kept Aliyev in power are now really toying with his removal, because they've been utterly annihilated inside Russia, and their hopes and dreams for expanding their control and influence and money are evaporating. And the Armenians that normally sell all of their fruit to the Russians have been halted at the Russian border and can't export anything. So I think we're losing, frankly. And a lot of that, of course, is Israel inspired. Most of it is, although we also want to break up the BRICS, one belt, one road back to China that runs up through Iran and through Azerbaijan and Central Asia. It's not going to work. But we're busy trying to do those things. And then we have this business in Venezuela germinating. And at home, we've gone into Washington, and now the president's talking about going to other cities. Well, that's all fine, well, and good. But again, where's the coherent strategy? Are we just listening to the reality TV show again? Oh, I thought of this last night. This is what we're going to do. And everybody says, oh, that's great. We're going to do this now. There doesn't seem to be any coherence. There aren't any cogent arguments for or against things. Don't see any discussions. And our position overseas has been dramatically weakened. I mean, now President Modi, who, in my judgment, is the leader of one of the most important countries on the planet, India, with what, 1.1 billion or 1.2 billion people, refuses to take phone calls now from President Trump. Won't talk to him. I think that's very unfortunate. But that's a product of the tariff business, which I think has backfired badly for the most part on the United States. So the whole thing is a mess. But the reality TV show continues. And Americans are easily swayed by optics. If it looks good and sounds good, it must be good. And that's where most Americans that watch the mainstream media that we were talking about earlier really reside. They reside in the corner that watches the big screen, and they are mesmerized by the reality TV show.
Now, since you mentioned the subject of the Middle East, there was reportedly an actual shouting match in an Israeli cabinet meeting between the chief of the IDF and Netanyahu, who wants to continue on with this occupation of Gaza, to continue on with this methodical, by bulldozer, physical destruction of the infrastructure, so it turns it to physical dust, not literal but physical. And he says we can't. The IDF commander argued we can't do this. We need an immediate ceasefire to end this conflict. Otherwise, we put both our troops and the remaining hostages at risk. And so far, it seems that Netanyahu has gone on with his own version of a reality TV show and says, nope, that's not true. I'm not going to go with it. At least so far, they're going to continue on with the occupation. Where do you see that going?
Well, the Israelis, I'm told, are also trying to recruit mercenaries from various sources in the West, people that are willing to come in there and do the job for money. They're also trying to entice Jews from the United States, North America, and other parts of Western Europe to come back and join the IDF and fight. That's not going very well. So I think there's no doubt he's in a lot of trouble, but he still has his ace in the hole, and that's absolute control over us. And we are not scaling back our support in any way, shape, or form. And we are providing the Israeli Defense Force with everything that it could possibly need. And there has been no change in that. By the way, we're still supplying the Ukrainians. We're sending things over there. Now, but you got to look at where the money goes and the activities as opposed to listening to the rhetoric. And that's when you discover really nothing has changed very much since Biden left. And so that's the problem, too. So I think Mr. Netanyahu has serious problems, but he still has a great deal of power and influence, and he's not going to give that up. And that includes power and influence over us. Remember, if he backs down from any of this, that's the end of his Greater Israel Project, which has implications for Syria, for Lebanon, for Egypt, for Jordan, for everybody. He's not prepared to do that. He says that it's not over, and I'm going to continue pressing forward. And I still think he has enormous support from the Israeli population. So that's why I've said from the beginning that what began with the attack on Iran during our negotiations with the Iranians is not over. That was a pause, not an end to the conflict. And that's going to re-erupt, I suspect, in September.
But now, where can this go, Doug? Because when you take a look at that, the Israeli Defense Force has not been able to, in many meaningful way, end the conflict in Gaza by itself. The Houthis are still out there. Even the Hezbollah is greatly weakened, but they still exist in there. Iran still exists with its missile capabilities that clearly can penetrate all of the integrated air defenses that Israel has. And then you see things like what happened, was reported in the last 48 hours or so, where Israel attacked a hospital And then when the emergency workers came to get the victims out, they double tapped it and blew up all those people. Just a heinous crime by any stretch. And yet there's no backing down from any of that to keep going. But I don't see any capacity to actually accomplish what you talk about, this greater Israel project, however defined. I don't think that they have the capacity to do it, however much we support them. Where is this going?
Well, the Israeli Air Force, other than its inability to necessarily, as you point out, overwhelm and utterly destroy the integrated air defenses in Iran, which were damaged and have since been repaired and are growing increasingly effective, as I'm told, through various intelligence sources. But keep something in mind. If you believe in what you're doing, you keep doing it, regardless of the potential downsides. As long as we continue to subsidize the Israeli economy and keep that afloat, and we're pumping huge quantities of money into that place. It's not just military, it's also to keep up the standard of living, because otherwise Israel would fall apart, overnight without that kind of economic subsidy. That's one thing. The other thing is that if you talk to Americans, and I try to talk to them wherever I travel, I would say at least 50% of the time, the Americans I talk to and I ask them about Gaza, they either haven't paid much attention to it or they say, that's fine, kill them. And I say, well, these are human beings. They said, no, they're not. These are Muslim Arabs. The hell with them. Let them kill them. It's not our problem. I'm serious.
Wow.
I run into people that tell me that flat out. You're wrong. I think this is great. Trump's doing exactly the right thing. Let these Israelis kill them. Now, that's not totally surprising, because most Americans have been fed a steady diet of hatred towards Arabs. I mean, let's face it, to know the Arabs from the standpoint of the average soldier who was shot at on the ground was not necessarily to love them. We were in the Middle East. We understood the differences in culture and mentality and behavior. But the average person doesn't understand that. The average person simply says, oh, these people are terrible. They deserve the worst. The Israelis are counting on that, and they have the news media to reinforce that negative stereotype repeatedly. And let's be frank, the Muslims don't help matters. If they bring up things like Sharia law and honor killings and all this in places like Canada or the Midwest, that doesn't endear them under any circumstance. That's unacceptable inside our societies, and that's immediately projected onto the people that live in Gaza or the West Bank, rightly or wrongly. And in most cases, I think probably wrongly. But nevertheless, that's a big issue. And that's why the so-called MAGA base continues to support the kind of policy that goes on. It's not easy for me to understand or justify. I'm just saying these are the facts. So if you look at that, you look at the enormous quantity of money that's on hand to continue to buy support in Congress. If you look at the people that surround the president and who they are and what they represent and the sectors from which they've come, particularly the financial sector, there's no reason to expect any change. So I think we'll see a resumption of the war. I think we're going to see more people killed. Now, what will that provoke in the region? And could that bring in the Russians, the Chinese, and others? That's eminently possible. And that's a whole different, set of questions worth exploring. But right now, I think it can continue. So I do not sign up for the notion that Israel, because of its obvious internal strains, is necessarily incapable of sustaining the larger operation.
Yeah, they may not be able to accomplish it, but they can sustain it. I do agree with you on that. In the remainder of the time we got, Doug, let me ask you, what is in America's actual interest in the Middle East? If Trump should call you up again and say, hey, I'd like your advice, what should we do here? What could the president do that would actually accomplish American genuine interest in the Middle East?
Well, first, let's be frank. No one is going to call me for advice on anything in the Middle East who's currently in the White House or, for that matter, on the Hill. You heard what Ted Cruz had to say in his discussion with Tucker. I think Ted Cruz is the proverbial tip of the iceberg. He can dress it up in whatever form he wants with religion or anything else. But the bottom line is the money has been invested. The return on that investment is the war that Israel is waging with our support in the region. So that's not going to change. What I would say is that our interest globally is very straightforward. We're always interested in stability. So, or we should be, so that if you see evidence for a potential conflict emerging, such as we saw in January, February, March of 2022, our immediate interest was not to gain control of resources or minerals or anything else, or oil or gas. It was to find a way to restore some measure of stability and order, a degree of stability and order that could exist without the presence or use of American military power. The best arrangement is an arrangement with which everybody can live, not necessarily the ones that we support. That's true in the Middle East. We always want to do business. We want good commercial relations. That's why the fact that someone like Modi, even though India's contribution to our trade is somewhere in the neighborhood of what, 3%. There's very little in the United States that we buy from India. Even though that's the case, this is the leader of a very large country with a potentially strategic role in the world, and he won't talk to us anymore. And it's all about the tariff business. It's even more serious with the Chinese for obvious reasons. I don't need to go into that. Yet we have these strange decisions, and one was just announced that for reasons that make no sense to me at all, President Trump has decided to admit 600,000 Chinese students to study in the United States. Frankly speaking, I would get rid of the tariffs and find a way to do business with the Chinese, but I certainly wouldn't invite any more into the country, not given the track record. The other thing is, the argument is, well, we have too many colleges and too few 18-year-olds to attend. Well, then maybe some of these colleges need to go away. These land-grant universities that were developed decades ago, if they can't find people that will attend them, then it's time for us to make some adjustments. This goes into the whole education argument. What are we educating people to do? Yeah. What are we churning out? What good is a graduate in basket weaving and ancient Greek culture or something? It's a waste of money. So that's another debate. But what I'm saying is the Chinese students in this country also have other interests. Every Chinese that leaves China is told, if you find anything of value for China, it's your solemn obligation and duty to steal it, get it, and bring it home. That's been true for 2,000 years. This is not a new policy invented by Xi, who just happens to be the current emperor, all right? So why are we doing this? I would not do that. So I don't understand that. But I would change my commercial relationship with the Chinese dramatically. And I think we need to do that. We need to come to some sort of understanding. This has not been possible with President Trump. When he walked in, he had virgin territory. It was completely open and new. He could have done any number of things. And what he's done is largely doubled down on bad decisions by the people that preceded him. That's the problem.
That is a problem.
By the way, he's now signed off on the government taking a 10% interest in Intel. Why? Why are we taking an interest in a high-tech firm in the IT world and putting the government in a position where it's investing and is now on the hook for the taxpayers' money that was invested? It doesn't make much sense to me. Why are we doing that? The government doesn't know anything about Intel's business. The last people I'd want involved in the private sector is anybody from the damn government.
Exactly.
So that's a mistake. The other thing is that the entire sector that Intel is part of is flooded with cash. In fact, a friend of mine in the business told me this morning, he said, Doug, we have too much cash chasing too few good ideas. Well, why is the government there? I'm beginning to become very suspicious when I see the dead hand of Peter Thiel and his friends in Palantir and the CIA now moving behind the scenes, installing people and candidates. Now, Congress, they probably say, well, that's fine. Maybe there's more money in this for me, which depresses me beyond belief.
Right.
Shouldn't be in that business. Remember Chrysler, the bailout? what a catastrophe that was. And the only thing we managed to do is reinforce the surging power of the Japanese automobile industry.
Tracker is not that good.
Yeah, you got to let some people fail. This is called creative destruction.
Yeah,
that's the nature of the marketplace. Anyhow, there are a lot of things happening right now, and I don't think the American people understand what's going on because they're not being told, and they're not really watching it.
Well, that's one of the reasons we love having you on this show here. And one of the reasons I understand that you're heading to Dallas coming up pretty soon. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about what that is, especially if any of our folks might be out there to come see you.
Yeah, I hope so. We're setting something up for the 4th of October at the Museum of Flight. I keep screwing that up. It's this brilliant museum on the just about 5 miles outside the center of Dallas. And with me will be, of course, the judge, who needs no introduction or explanation, and Natalie Brunell, who I think is one of the sharpest and most intelligent young women I've run into. And we have moderating this panel through a whole series of questions, Olga Ravasi, who is an extraordinarily bright person and also brings an interesting perspective given her background. I think this is an attempt to start a conversation across the country about all these kinds of issues. It's not designed for us to necessarily tell the audience how the world should be. It's rather to go through a series of questions and all the things that you and I have mentioned here and more, and then interact with the audience. And it's a select audience. Not everybody's going to be there. It'll be about 350 people, we hope. And they'll have a chance to respond to the questions and respond to what we say. Then, of course, there'll be a cutoff point. We can't spend 3 hours on one topic or 2 hours. It's basically a reception for an hour and then 2 hours nonstop of dealing with all of these things. A friend of mine said it sounds like a combination of Phil Donahue and Jay Leno. I said, well, maybe it is. We want to interact with the audience. We want to do this, we hope, every 90 to 120 days across the country. So Dallas is the start point. We want people to come in, listen and respond and comment and express their views, because we really do want to get a flavor for what Americans think. I know that may sound silly, but it's
well, that sounds fantastic to me. That's the last thing. Hardly anybody does that anymore. Everybody just feeds the American people, so they don't want to know what they think.
Anyway, I think it's going to be fun. I think.
And flowing in right now on the Minnesota shooter. This morning, a horrific, absolutely senseless act of violence unfolded at the Annunciation Catholic School in Minneapolis. And while the corporate media is, of course, scrambling right now to hide the facts, we have the truth. And here's what we know at this hour. So while children were in morning mass praying, this man is a biological man who now was pretending to be a woman. The shooter identified his sources as a transgender man using the name Robin Westman. He was formerly Robert Westman. Opened fire on the church and school during a morning mass, killing 2 innocent children, injuring 17 others. A couple of these children who are in the hospital right now in critical condition. So unfortunately, that number might change. And then in a final act of cowardice, the shooter then took his own life right in the middle of the church. And he planned it that way. He knew exactly where he was going to go. He knew this church well. In fact, he had a map of it. He'd drawn a map of exactly where he would be with the pews and where he was going to take his own life. And he released a video, in the video showing exactly where he was going to do it. Using this knife, he slammed it right into the notebook to show the spot where he was going to take his own life after he mowed down the children. Again, he knew this church well because it turns out his mom worked there for years And she had recently retired. Here was her going away announcement from the Church of Annunciation. On Sunday, we honored Mary Grace Westman, who's retiring from the Annunciation Church. She's been there for years. Congratulations on your retirement. Now, she retired a few years ago, and she allowed her son, while he was a minor, to change his name legally from Robert to Robin, according to the court records that are now public, which you can, of course, see for yourself. There, you see her name right there at the top, Mary Grace Westman, and allowing him to change his name to Robin Westman, because, again, he was a minor at the time. He was 17 years old at the time, so this was allowed. But let's listen to the police chief earlier today describing the scene and what they found.
Police officers from the Minneapolis Police Department immediately responded, entered the church, and attempted to provide first aid and rescue some of the children that were hiding throughout the building, while other first responders came and EMS responded to rush victims to nearby hospitals. 2 young children, ages 8 and 10, were killed where they sat in the pews.
Of course, the mainstream media and the police would normally hide the identity of the shooter if it doesn't fit their narrative, especially if it's in a liberal city like Minneapolis. But this time they couldn't because it got all over social media ahead of time. So this is the shooter that turns out to be a transgender male. Just before the shooting, Robert or Robin posted a ranting video on YouTube, seemingly like possessed by demons or something, rambling about having bugs under his skin. This is some kind of bizarre, unhinged behavior the legacy media always seems to sweep under the rug. Oh, it's a trans person with mental issues, probably on some kind of hormones and all sorts of drugs, who knows? And they're saying that they've got bugs under their skin and they're ranting and raving. We're going to hide that because it doesn't fit our liberal narrative with the trans agenda. So immediately they jumped into action, though. And they certainly jumped in as they tried to hide it as quickly as they could because they deleted all of his social media. All of his social media was scrubbed across multiple platforms, including YouTube, immediately scrubbed it, wiped his whole channel down. So that video was gone. But it's kind of amazing to me because some of the things that were said in that video, I mean, if we were to put that kind of stuff on our channel, we would immediately be flagged for it. But I don't know how YouTube allowed this channel to be up there with him talking about basically killing Donald Trump and worse and all sorts of other stuff. But they let that go until I guess everyone jumped on and realized that he had a YouTube channel, and then YouTube scrubbed it. YouTube did remove the video, so we're not going to show it to you here. He posted 2 videos. You can see them all over X if you want to watch it, but we're not going to do it here because YouTube has already taken it down. But we can show you some still images here in a moment. But the details get even more outrageous because the shooter had an ammo magazine with the words "Kill Donald Trump" scrawled on it. Another said "For the children, ha ha ha." You can see here, ha 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 ha, that's funny. And in the video, he's just laughing about killing the children. We can also confirm that he had a target on the wall with the face of Jesus Christ on top, and a target clearly intention to kill Catholics, to kill Christians, to kill children. That was his goal, right on a target in his room. What more of an example do you need? You have ammunition. You're laying out exactly what you're going to do. Jesus Christ is up on a target on the wall. You've got children written on your ammo magazine. What more of a motive do you need? Oh, but the police chief just a few minutes ago in Minneapolis came back out to the podium to tell the world that we have identified no motive, that there is no motive with this guy. No motive? We've all seen the video. Are you out of your freaking mind? You have a picture of Jesus Christ on your wall? There's no motive? Are you kidding me? You're going to kill children written on, you're targeting, Donald Trump. You want to go after Donald Trump? You're trying to go after Christian conservative children?
Well, you could also see in these videos that he went through, some of his journals, apology letters to his families. Again, these have not been independently verified, but they were on the videos. And he was saying, I've been depressed for a long time. Also, I think I have lung cancer. And so I'm just not going to die of cancer. No, who knows if that's true, right? This kind of paranoia is very common when you are on SSRIs. So it is worth asking, was this person and this neuroses manufactured by pharmaceuticals? That's a valid question.
Well, absolutely. It's to me, I tweeted this earlier. I said the one common denominator in all of these mass shootings across the United States is always some sort of connection to antidepressants and SSRIs. We've done deep dive videos here and interviews here on the channel about this. I encourage you to go check them out. But it's a common denominator in all of these shootings. Now, a lot of it is kept hidden, obviously, because they're minors at the time, so we don't get access to their medical records. But then we learn from family and friends that, oh yes, this guy, in relation to what happened in Columbine, he was on antidepressants, and now we know from pharmacists, we know that they're handing out these SSRIs like they're candy. It's just unbelievable how much antidepressants are flowing into our children. They're basically like sitting there like drones these days. And then when you add that on top of like trans hormones.
Well, exactly. Yeah, because trans hormones also increase risk of cancer. So we don't know if he actually had cancer or not. He might have just been super paranoid, thinking that he was, that's not been reported anywhere. But yes. And the fact that he transitioned, that his mother allowed him to transition his name, the data is irrefutable that when a child transitions, it does not make them better. It locks them in to a path of misery. And most of the time, the gender dysphoria persists and it only makes them sterile, locks them into a pain of always trying to convince the world that they are something they're not. And it worsens their depression and their body dysphoria. So, that's not refutable science at this point. I can give you a laundry list of studies that show this. So he was allowed to go down a path that was destructive. We don't know what hormones then he was on after this name change, but it's likely, from the photos we've got, it doesn't seem like any cross-sex hormones were being very effective. He still very much looks like a boy, but we just don't know. We are absolutely, as a society, owed those answers.
Well, and also, so today's Annunciation Catholic Church shooter identified as trans, the Aberdeen shooter identified as trans, the Nashville Christian shooter identified as trans, the Lakewood Church shooter identified as trans. The list is like endless. I don't know how many I'm missing here in all of this. Now, a lot of people saying, oh, this could have been a false flag operation, Well,
I think,
And absolutely. Look, sure. We're open to anything. Absolutely. Was this a false flag operation? Let us know in the chat room if you think that this was a false flag operation. To what end, though? Like targeting Christians to incite. What exactly is this a motivation towards? I always look when we have a false flag. What is the answer here? What do you? I think as people are saying in the chat, we are owed this answer exactly.
Well, Kash Patel says that they are looking into prosecution as a hate crime, and I hate everything about this story, but I do not believe in hate crimes, full stop. So those kind of things always expand the government's power. Look at the piece that I did about Matthew Shepard and how hate crimes were introduced based on a lie and have only expanded government power. So sure, there's an angle for how this continues to expand government power. I'm open to this. We don't know right now. It only happened today.
And to go after Christians to target, who would have carried this out? Like, was some people saying, oh, he could have been like MK Ultra brainwashed by the CIA and carried out this operation. Right. You always look for disillusioned individuals that you can brainwash. We've interviewed many people here on this show who are survivors of MK Ultra. So we're open to it. Yeah. But obviously the story is developing and we will continue to follow it as these details emerge. So we're in the early hours of this story, but that is what we know for sure right now.
Taking place in schools across the country, a horrific So after a plethora, and I mean a plethora of hoaxes involving either active shooters or shootings taking place in schools across the country, a horrific incident happened today in Minneapolis. Matter of fact, I was actually going to go ahead and talk about this in yesterday's video, but I ran out of time because I had to go to work. But numerous people across social media were saying how they felt like something big was going to happen at a school because of all these hoaxes. You can see some of them right here in just a span of days, and this is not the entire list, as some of the hoaxes also involve high schools or elementary schools. But today, if you're not aware, perhaps you're not from the United States, there was a horrific incident in Minneapolis where a shooting took place at a Catholic church, which also served as a school. 2 children passed away and 17 are injured. Now, the suspect is said to be this individual right here, but there is something pretty strange about this, which I will go ahead and get into. But first, reading this news article right here, it says, the attacker, a man in his early 20s dressed in black clothing, targeted a mass marking the first week of classes for children attending the school, according to Minneapolis Police Chief Brian O'Hara. Now, continue to read the article. It says, during the mass, a gunman approached on the outside on the side of the building and began firing a rifle through the church windows towards the children sitting in the pews at the mass. Shooting through the windows, he struck children and worshipers that were inside the building, O'Hara said. The shooter was armed with a rifle, a shotgun, and a pistol. Like I said, just absolutely horrific and tragic, but I saw something that I definitely have to talk about because apparently the person that caused this horrific incident had a YouTube channel. Now, I don't know when YouTube decided to take his channel down, but prior to YouTube taking his channel down, somebody had screen recorded one of his last videos. And I have to say, it is one of the strangest videos I had seen involving an individual like this. And of course, present in this video is the manifesto he had written out. So like with all these other cases, there is a manifesto present, but not just that. During the video, he shows us all his guns, all his weapons, and on all his guns, there are symbols and messages written by him. But what I find really weird is that on some of the guns, he uses another language, that language being Russian. This right here is very telling. It shows him with or talking to a demon, but the message at the top is in Russian. And when you translate it, it says, "Who am I? When will this end? Help me. I don't want to." Some other guns have anti-Israel messages. And then you have other guns that say that end Trump, he's going to end Trump, his life. Now, I'm not going to go ahead and play the video. You can go ahead and find it yourself. If you see it yourself, you're going to see just how strange it is and very telling as to what's going on here. But I do want to go ahead and play this part because listen to what he says.
This message brought to you by BlackRock and ExxonMobil, sponsored by Pabst Blue Ribbon, Brandon Herrera for president.
And now you can also see this right here in this part in the same exact video that I had screenshot where he writes down sponsored by BlackRock. So in this video, sponsored by BlackRock appears multiple times. But we have seen something similar to this before involving a shooting where BlackRock's name had appeared. Back in July of 2024, during Trump's rally, there was a shooting and they said it was this individual right here, Thomas Matthew Crooks, but news came out that Thomas Matthew Crooks also appeared in a BlackRock commercial. What happens to be interesting is that I made numerous videos about what happened at Trump's rally and also the BlackRock connection. And I said during those videos that Thomas Matthew Crooks was not the individual that was on the roof. Thomas Matthew Crooks was going to be used in another agenda, a school pow agenda. I really don't feel like registering at the moment, but like I said, they will slowly build a narrative for this man now. He is a build-a-bear narrative. Thomas Crooks was going to be used in another narrative, another agenda, a school pow. This is why his background involves school bullying. He was being picked on because of his clothes. He was a loner. This is the MO of every person that has caused a school pow. Look at the very suspicious interviews where news and media are interviewing Thomas Matthew Crooks' classmates, and they look like they were heavily coached on what to say. This is indeed getting more and more wild, and I wouldn't doubt one bit that that commercial was some sort of predictive programming for that school pow where the suspect was intended to be Thomas Matthew Crooks. There are those of you that are saying, well, if Secret Service took out Maxwell Yerrick, then where is Thomas Matthew Crooks? Well, since Thomas Matthew Crooks is no longer of use and he would blow their cover, I am sure he was easily disposed of. Even though Thomas Matthew Crooks was a grown man, he graduated college, he had a job, all news and media did was interview people from his high school, people from his middle school and elementary school. Again, it had all the stench of somebody that was going to cause a horrific event at a school. And this individual was connected to BlackRock. So two individuals connected to BlackRock, where schools were the focus, involved in shootings. Again, Thomas Matthew Crooks, yeah, he shot at Trump's rally, but like I said, going back to my previous videos, I strongly believe they got those narratives mixed up, and he was going to be involved in a school incident that have something against Trump. Let us also not forget that Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, has become one of the leaders of the World Economic Forum just very recently after having Klaus Schwab step down. BlackRock literally has their hands in basically everything, and now they are the leaders of a organization that basically are the puppet masters of this world. But going back to that individual's video that caused the horrific incident in Minneapolis, the symbolisms in that video, like I said, are crazy. And I constantly see these two symbols pop up. This symbol right here and this bird appear quite often in this video. Very recently as well, we had an incident involving an organization very similar to BlackRock, Blackstone, BlackRock, where a shooting took place in this building. This individual, Shane Tamura, where if you scramble his last name, you get trauma. He goes into an elevator, goes to the 33rd floor, and takes out the CEO of Blackstone. And even though something definitely stinks here, especially now that BlackRock's name has popped up multiple times, at the end of the day, what took place today involving children was absolutely horrific. Now, I know some people out there will say, how dare you make a conspiracy theory out of this? It's too early to make a conspiracy theory out of this, but they are showing us this right to our face for a reason. Do you know how many times I have made a YouTube video and instantly, about 5 minutes into the video, somebody will tell me, your video was taken right down. YouTube had taken your video right down. And I would spend about hours making that video only for it to be taken right down. And yet this individual's videos were up for quite some time, to the point that somebody was able to find his name before news and media were able to go ahead and give it out. They were able to find his YouTube channel and basically show us all of what we're seeing in this video. And yet you'll have my own subscribers tell you that they'll be in the middle of watching my video, not even about 3-4 minutes into the video, and they'll find that YouTube had taken the video down or had blocked the visibility to the point that I have to take the video down. I have to self-censor because I am tired of seeing my stuff taken down. And yet this individual right here with all this symbolism, all these weapons, his message, what he was saying, he was able to keep his video up, his YouTube video up long enough for somebody to go ahead and screen record it and show us this. But it's not just me. How many times have I read in the comment section from a lot of you telling me that YouTube has deleted your comment? Every time you post a comment, YouTube deletes it. People think it's me deleting comments, but when comments get deleted, it actually hurts the video. Matter of fact, a lot of times in my own videos, my comments get deleted. When I go to reply to somebody, I'll see that either their comment's no longer there or my comment is no longer there. I don't know if they have bots all out monitoring things, but they are lightning fast when it comes to deleting things they want deleted. So they, again, are showing us this for a reason. What we're being shown here, BlackRock, brought to you by BlackRock, endorsed by BlackRock. This is not a conspiracy theory. It's a message. Now, of course, there is a whole lot more I do want to go ahead and say, but I'm not going to go ahead and say it on YouTube. I will go ahead and say it on my Umble page. So if you want to see more that I have to say on this topic, please do go ahead and follow me on Umble. I'll go ahead and try to make a video about this on Umble, but I do want to go ahead and make it clear I'm not blaming YouTube for anything. I just find it odd that his videos and his channel was up for that long. But like I said, I was going to go ahead and make a video on this subject yesterday because there were multiple people, including myself, that felt like something big was going to happen involving a school because news and media, they were flooding us with news about how there were all these hoaxes involving either an active shooter or an actual shooting taking place at schools. I was actually going to go ahead and use this individual's clip yesterday as reference. He made this video yesterday. His name is Pascal.
All right, y'all. There's something I need to talk to y'all about. There's just been a lot of school hoaxes, if you get what I'm saying, going on throughout the country. And I got to ask y'all something. Is this a foreshadowing for something? Are they trying, is this like a test of some sort, trying to see how America or these schools and these universities are handling these types of hoaxes that are going on throughout the country? I mean, we just had another one, if I'm correct, in Arkansas, and it was a hoax. Didn't we have another one earlier yesterday as well? And they keep coming. They keep occurring over and over and over again. What is really going on here? Somebody talk to me, y'all, because like I'm wondering what the hell's really going on here. Is something big about to happen? I'm not trying to fearmonger. I'm just asking a question for a friend. You feel me?
He is not wrong. He is not wrong whatsoever. Now, while these type of hoaxes have happened in the past, 2024, 2023, and so forth, never have we seen it in such a frequency. Just look at this list in just a span of days involving multiple schools. And this is just some of the schools on the list, not all of them in a span of days. Matter of fact, one happened today at UTSA. Reading this news article right here, UTSA students evacuated from on-campus housing following hoax threats. This article from TPR continues to say, students at the University of Texas at San Antonio were forced to briefly evacuate campus housing last night due to not one, but two hoax threats. Now, while a majority of these are college campuses, there was also a high school, like this news article right here. Active shooter threat at Alcovey High proves to be a hoax. And I believe there was also another incident involving a elementary school that also proved to be a hoax. So the question happens to be, what is going on here? And when it comes to what happened in Minneapolis, yeah, we can't take mental illness off the table. But given the fact, again, of all that symbolism and BlackRock appearing, you can't take the type of MK Ultra mental illness off the table either. Now, and remember, this movie, Weapons Involving Children, just came out very recently. And as always, they like to go ahead and show us what's going to happen ahead of time. And this movie had a ton of symbolism inside. Interesting is that I made numerous videos about what happened at Trump's rally and also the BlackRock connection. And I
Excuse me 1 second. Oh, it wasn't a black male. Okay. All right. Yeah. No, that makes sense. I'm sorry. It was apparently a Latino male. Even worse, we see why Trump is trying to deport these people out of here. They're criminals. A Latino male that went to a Catholic school and Give me 1 moment. I'm getting an update. So it wasn't a Latino male. Huh? That can't be. You guys double check? You guys sure? Okay. All right. That's awfully weird. Apologies. I've been updated, and since new information that's current and accurate is that it was a white male that went to a Catholic school and apparently did a horrible thing. That's what that's what happened to be. Bruh, listen, it's not funny, but I'm just letting you know this is what happens, okay? Y'all were so focused on the Smithsonian, right? Y'all were so focused on Black history. We got to erase Black history. We got to get rid of affirmative action. We can't have that. We got to get rid of a birthright citizenship. All this focus on that. all the focus on bastardizing black jargon, right? When it comes to bastardizing the word woke, trying to use that as a negative. When it now comes to as far as trying to steal, which is what they're, that's what they're good at, if we're going to be honest, okay? Trying to steal and colonize black fatigue. A term that we use amongst black people to acknowledge the foolishness that we had to put up with the lineage of evil. Damn. Sure enough, they try to flip it and say, oh, we got black fatigue. That's what happens. Now, how did all that prevent what happened in Minnesota? Can you all tell me? What? I'm all ears. Can you all explain to me? Because I just want to be perfectly clear. Never, I'll say in the last few decades in this country, have you ever had a black person, okay, go to a predominantly white church and do a crime like this? You've never had a black person go to anywhere predominantly white and purposefully, with the intent, trying to harm a group of people because they're white. Hasn't happened. But you want to know what has happened? We had that, what happened in Buffalo, the little white boy there. And what you need to understand is that the chickens are coming home to roost.
He's out of line, but he's right.
It just is what it is. I know there are a lot of good white people out there like, Lucas, I didn't have anything to do with this. This isn't fair. I understand. I hear you. I know it's not fair. But as the scripture says that y'all love to quote, the rain falls on the just and the unjust alike. Okay. So now, because y'all were silent while the lineage of evil were doing their evil, now it's coming to your doorsteps. Okay. And I want people to also understand when they want to talk about accountability, when they want to talk about responsibility, when they want to talk about, oh, black people have been coddled. No. The number one group of people who have been coddled in this country are white people, specifically white men, we'll say. And I'm not saying all of them. No, I'm talking about the lineage of evil. Because when they go and do something where they say, oh, well, little Timmy came from a good background. That's why we should give him a lenient sentence for what he did to that woman. We see this all the time. We had the two kids. Remember the two kids who had guns? All right, pointing at officers. And what happened? They didn't start pop, going off at the kids, right? Because they were two white kids, two white boys. What happened? The officer came up and give me those guns. What did they do with Tamir Rice? What did they do with Elijah McClain? What did they do with Willie McCoy? Damn. Just letting you know, the number one group that has been coddled is them. As I said before, every accusation is a confession. What they love to do is project. It's a form of gaslighting that they have mastered over time. Because as I said before, this lineage of evil comes here to kill, steal, and destroy. What have they done? What? Number one on the checklist. What did they do in Minnesota? That's what they did. And it's unfortunate because what the conversation, what the discourse will look like 99.9% of the time. I'll bet my life on it, okay? I'm not even a betting man, but this bet I would take. You're going to have two sides. You're going to have people who are like, it's mental health. It's mental health. The people have mental health problems and we've got to address it.
How do we stop this? Obviously, we have a mental health crisis in this country. We need to deal with it.
You know that's what they're going to say, bro. That's what the Republicans say all the time. They coddle the white men, okay? They coddle their white ignorance. That's what they do all the time. And what happens is nothing gets solved because they don't do anything for mental health, right? They don't do anything for white males. So what they do is they gaslight them. That's what they do. They gaslight them and tell them, you're perfect, little Timmy. It's not you, it's them. It's the blacks. That's why you have mental health issues, okay? It's the CRT that they're teaching in schools. That's why you have the white guilt and you feel bad about yourself and you're mentally, not okay. It's them. And what happens? Black people are going, what are you, what? Huh? And what happens to little Timmy? Little Timmy goes on in this world thinking that he's perfect, thinking that he's flawless. They have revised the history books to protect little Timmy's frail ego, okay? Damn. And little Timmy starts to get into the real world. And he understands now that he has to compete. Little Timmy has never competed in his life. His grandparents didn't compete. His parents' didn't compete because little Timmy comes from a lineage of evil. So little Timmy starts to realize that he's inadequate, that, the black kid runs faster. The Asian kid is smarter than me. The Latino kid catches language easier than me. Little Timmy starts to realize that he's severely let's say, compromise in a multitude of areas, okay? And then he tries to go for his girl, right? He tries to get girls, and he realizes the girls aren't really attracted to him because little Timmy's frail. Little Timmy doesn't know how to talk. Little Timmy's socially, awkward. And that's not what they go for. They usually go for the athlete, all right? They usually go for the cool guy. And little Timmy starts to get into depressed mode. And little Timmy starts to take it out on the world because it's the world's fault. It's never little Timmy's fault because little Timmy has been told since he was a knee-high to duck that little Timmy, you're perfect, you're good, you're A-okay. It's the blacks, okay? And really, little Timmy, it's the Jews. Those are the people that are the problems, okay, in your life. It's not you. You've done nothing wrong, okay? We've done nothing wrong. That's why the country tries to attack us, okay? We've just tried to help this country. We built this country, and our ancestors built this country. But they just want to do anti-white racism. But it's okay, little Timmy, you'll be fine. And that's what little Timmy's been told. So now little Timmy is going in his head. Oh, this is horrible. Oh, the blacks. Oh, man, this is going on. I can't even get a girlfriend. And little Timmy has been raised in a culture, because y'all know how they love to talk about black culture. Oh, it's the culture problem. That's what it is, y'all. You have to understand it's a culture problem. And then the real racists, what they want to say, oh, it's an IQ problem. They're just low IQ. It just is what it is. Low IQ, high testosterone, low impulse control. It's a recipe for disaster. So in the meantime, between time, while they're spending all this energy on black people, little Timmy is going to the firing range. And little Timmy doesn't look too good. Little Timmy's walking like this, talking to himself. Little Timmy's taking guns, right? Because his daddy showed him how to do guns, because they're all about the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment shall not be infringed. And little Timmy's learning how to fire his 9. He's learning how to fire his AR. Little Timmy's learning about defensive maneuvers, defensive tactics. Oh, this is a smoke grenade? Oh, okay. Oh, you that. Little Timmy's, just sitting at home, taking in all this culture, right? All of his culture. Just so we're clear. We got nothing to do with this. Eventually, little Timmy goes off, okay? Little Timmy goes off because he's realized, well, I should be doing this, but that's not what's happening, all right? And it's the black people, and that's not right, and this is my country, and they're doing the crime, and little Timmy goes off. Little Timmy goes on we'll say a hunting spree, except this time, little Timmy isn't hunting rabbits, okay? He's hunting white people, okay? Now, I could be mistaken. Maybe this white kid was probably trying to hunt, okay? And he just happened to mistook the white people as rabbits. He just thought, oh, wow, these are really big rabbits. All right, I'm gonna win a prize. I'm gonna win the fair prize. Let me get all these rabbits. I don't know. I'm not in his mind.
Well, new today at noon, the man charged with killing a Hartford teenager pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity.
Outrage as the monster known as the frat boy cannibal is declared not guilty by reason of insanity.
A man accused of wielding a machete during a 2020 assault plans to plead temporary insanity in his case. Police say Martin Georgie of hurting 2 people back in October of 2020 in Davenport.
Officers Ryan Hardy and Matthew O'Connor sat in court as the man, prosecutors say, shot them in 2016, went before a judge.
At the time that you committed these 2 attempted murders, were you suffering from some sort of mental disease or defect?
Yes.
Someone cooked here.
But what I can tell you is that the chickens are coming home to roost. You cannot tell a group of people that they're A-okay when they're skyrocketing in mental health. You can't tell a group of people the problem is black when they're the ones that are committing the crimes. They're the ones that are doing the heinous crimes. They're the ones that are doing the school problems, all right? They're the ones that are DVs when it comes to their girlfriend, when it comes to their family, when it comes to their children. They want to label black men. Oh, they're not present in the household. That's a lie. You look at them, it's white men. But they will always have an excuse. Well, per capita, Lucas, per capita. How does per capita help the white community? How does per capita help the white community? You all are so focused on black people that y'all have let your own community go cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. Damn. And what they are doing is now attacking your community. They'll always attack us. I mean, it just is what it is. Now they're attacking y'all because that's what you've done. You've gaslit them. You've gaslit just as Charlie Kirk has done. Told a bunch of all these young Zoomers, right? Go out and have families. In the meantime, between time, how are you going to have a family on $7.25 an hour? How are you going to have a family? They working 40 hours a week and still can't pay for rent, much less get a house, much less be able to provide for a family, but they gaslight them. So naturally, yes, they're going to have some mental health issues. Naturally, they're going to be cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. And we see this. We see this in the birth rates. Birth rates declining, mental health issues skyrocketing. The list goes on, diseases skyrocketing. I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what you can do except to expect this. And if you think I'm joking, it's so crucial. It's so overt right now. It's no denying it, right? That even Fox News, Trey Gowdy is admitting that, hey, the problem is white males.
It's always a young white male, almost always. I mean, did anyone this morning think, I wonder if that was a female? Did any of y'all think that? I mean, there's been one school shooting involving a female. One. Yeah, Tennessee. But other than that, it is usually young white males.
Someone cooked here.
Now, you just heard it out of the horse's mouth. But will anything come out of it? I highly doubt. Like I said, you're going to have the right who's going to say mental health and do nothing about mental health. And then you're going to have the left who says, hey, it's a gun problem. It's a gun problem. That's what's going on. And then you're going to have the goofies who try to blame trans people. That's the one that always gets me. I'm like, wait, trans? Y'all going to try and blame trans? It kind of reminds me of when they say, oh, it's the Jews, Lucas. I'm like, okay, let's have fun with that, right? I'm going to take that argument. I'm going to raise you, all right? What type of Jews? Are these Ethiopian Jews? No? Okay. What type of trans? Are these black trans? No? Okay. And it all goes back to them. It all goes back to the lineage of evil. Damn. But until other white people can take accountability and admit, hey, we've got to do something about this lineage of evil, they're going to get harmed in the process. Because for the longest, they thought they were infallible. They thought, hey, well, it's just going to hurt the blacks. It's just going to hurt the Japanese. It's just going to hurt the Mexicans. We're good. Goes back to Lyndon Johnson quote. As I've said time and time again, these mofos have been so conditioned. They've been so conditioned to hope for our defeat more than their victory. Because what they have done is condition them to believe that our defeat is their victory. So if our defeat is their victory, then they can stay poor. They can die. They can wither away. Y'all just being used. I'm just the first person, maybe not the first person. I'm probably far down the road in the people who have tried to warn you in history. But let me just say, I'm warning y'all. Anyways, guys, that's the video. Let me know what you guys think. Whether or not you believe, look, it's mental health.
Kofi, follow me.